Get in my pickup right now, simple rancher says to formerly wealthy alien mom of three. What Zelara's heart pounded in her chest as the worn-down shuttle glided through the alien skies, its engines sputtering in the way only an old craft could. She gripped the armrests, eyes darting back and forth between the cracked control panel and the expanse of stars outside. Behind her in the small cabin, her three children sat nervously. They had only just left the war-torn planet they once called home, and the unknown ahead filled them with fear and uncertainty. The planet they had just left was beautiful, once filled with lush landscapes and peaceful cities. Now it was nothing but a battleground, where power-hungry factions waged endless wars for control. The riches that Zelara once had, the life of luxury, had evaporated when the regime fell. She had lost everything in an instant. The mansion, the servants, the fame, the influence, all of it was gone. She was just a mother now, trying to protect her children with nothing left but the clothes on their backs. She had never imagined her life would come to this. Zelara had once been a powerful figure, a woman admired across galaxies for her wealth and influence. She had never known the sting of poverty or fear for her survival. But now, it felt as though the universe itself was conspiring to bring her to her knees. The once untouchable alien empress had been reduced to nothing more than a refugee. Zelara's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden jolt of the shuttle as it descended onto the surface of an unfamiliar planet. The control panel flickered, and she cursed under her breath. She had hoped for a smooth landing, but the damage from her escape was too much. The shuttle wasn't going to last much longer. "Mom, where are we?" her youngest, a girl named Lyra, asked from the back. Zelara turned to look at her daughter, her heart aching. Lyra was only 6, too young to understand the dangers that surrounded them. She had lost the innocence of childhood the moment the war had started, but her mother would do everything to keep her safe. "We're somewhere safe," Zelara replied softly. "We'll be okay here." The shuttle's engines sputtered again as it finally touched down with a soft thud. Zelara quickly unstrapped herself and helped her children out of their seats. They needed to move fast. Her brief moment of relief was shattered by the knowledge that the factions that had hunted her down on her home planet might not be far behind. She had hoped to find a peaceful place, but she knew nothing about this planet or its inhabitants. The best she could do was hide and pray that the galaxy would forget about her. She pulled open the hatch of the shuttle, the cold air outside hitting her like a slap in the face. The landscape was barren, with nothing but flat land stretching out before her. In the distance, there were a few scattered buildings, and she could make out a large green field that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't much, but it was better than the war zone she had fled. "Stay close, kids," Zelara ordered, her voice steady even though her nerves were frayed. "We'll find shelter in those buildings." Her children nodded silently, their faces pale with fear. They followed her closely as they stepped out of the shuttle, their footsteps crunching against the dry earth. Zelara felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. This was no longer the world of luxury she had once known. This was a new world, one that would require every ounce of strength and determination she had left. As they walked toward the buildings, Zelara couldn't help but glance back at the shuttle. It was falling apart, its hull scraped and dented from her hasty escape. It wouldn't be long before it was no longer usable, but she couldn't afford to stay there. The longer they lingered, the more likely it was that someone would find them. The buildings ahead appeared to be part of a small rural town. It wasn't much, just a few houses with wooden fences and barns. There were no signs of life, no vehicles or people in sight. It felt eerily deserted. Zelara frowned, sensing that something wasn't quite right, but she had no choice but to continue. After walking for what felt like hours, they reached the first house. The door was slightly ajar, and Zelara hesitated. She wasn't sure whether it was safe to enter, but the lack of any other options pushed her forward. She stepped inside, her children close behind her. The inside was modest, simple wooden furniture, no decorations or luxuries. It was the kind of place Zelara had never imagined herself in. A few moments passed before she heard the sound of a truck approaching. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly gathered her children close to her, crouching low to the ground and trying to keep them quiet. She peered through the small window, her eyes widening as a rugged-looking man in an old pickup truck drove by. The man slowed as he passed the house, glancing over at the group of them. His truck was old, the paint chipped and fading, but it looked sturdy. The man himself was rough around the edges, wearing a worn-out hat and faded jeans. His face was weathered by the sun, and there was something in his expression that seemed to say he had seen it all. The truck came to a stop, and Zelara felt her heart race. She was about to move deeper into the house when the man's voice called out to her. "Hey there," he shouted. "You folks need a ride." Zelara froze. She wasn't sure whether she could trust him, but she didn't have many options. She had to keep moving, and this man might be her only chance at safety. She gave him a cautious look, then stepped out onto the porch with her children close behind her. "You could say that," Zelara replied, her voice guarded. "We're just passing through." The man looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "Well, you're in luck. I've got a pickup truck and it's headed into town. You can hop in if you want. I'll take you to a place where you can rest up for a while." Zelara hesitated, glancing back at her children. They were exhausted and the journey had taken its toll. They needed shelter, and she wasn't sure if she could keep them safe in this strange world on her own. The man seemed harmless enough, though there was something about him that felt different from the people she had known. He wasn't asking questions, wasn't prying into their past. It was a strange relief, one that Zelara hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. "We'll take the ride." The man gave a short nod and climbed out of his truck. As he opened the door for them, Zelara couldn't help but notice the kind but hard look in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of her, that much was clear. In fact, there was something about him that made Zelara feel like she could trust him, even if she didn't fully understand why. The children climbed into the truck first, and Zelara followed them, settling herself into the worn seat next to them. The man closed the door behind her and climbed into the driver's seat. Without a word, the engine roared to life, and they started down the dirt road. The world outside was dark now, the sky streaked with stars as the truck rumbled forward. Zelara looked out the window, lost in her thoughts. She didn't know what the future held for them on this strange new planet, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small sliver of hope. Perhaps, just maybe, things were beginning to change. As the truck bumped along the rough dirt road, the sound of the engine filled the air, but Zelara couldn't shake the feeling that everything was wrong. The wind rushed through the cracks in the windows, and the chilly night air tugged at her hair. Her children were quiet, exhausted from the long journey, but their eyes darted around nervously as if they too felt the weight of their new life settling over them. The man driving didn't say a word at first. His focus was on the road ahead, his hands firm on the wheel, but there was something about the way he sat in the truck that made Zelara feel like he was used to this kind of work. No nonsense, steady, always moving forward. He didn't seem like the type of person to ask questions or pry into someone's past. That was both a relief and a worry. She didn't want to tell him too much, didn't want him to know everything about her and her family, but at the same time, she didn't want to hide forever. They needed help, and this man had offered it without hesitation. Zelara stole a glance at the rancher. He was older than her, maybe in his mid-30s. His face was weathered, the kind of look that came from working outdoors for years. His skin was darkened by the sun, and his hands, though rough and calloused, moved with a practiced ease on the steering wheel. His eyes, a deep brown, flicked over to her for a brief second, before returning to the road. There was something in those eyes, something kind but hardened by experience. He wasn't just a simple rancher. She could tell. Her children were huddled together in the back seat, their eyes wide as they tried to take in the new surroundings. Lyra, the youngest, had fallen asleep, her head resting against the side window. It was a rare moment of peace, one that Zelara hadn't experienced in a long time. Her older son, Zane, sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, always alert, always ready. He had grown up quickly, far too quickly. "Are we safe here?" Zane asked, suddenly breaking the silence. Zelara turned to him, her face softening as she met his gaze. "For now," she replied, her voice quieter than usual. "We'll be okay." Zane didn't seem convinced. He shifted in his seat, his eyes scanning the darkened landscape around them. The town they were heading to seemed small and remote, far from the bustling cities and the luxurious life they had once known. It felt like a different world, one that didn't care about power or wealth. Zelara wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. The rancher broke the silence then, his voice deep and calm. "You folks ever been out here before?" Zelara shook her head, keeping her gaze on the road ahead. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "We're new here, just passing through." The man nodded, his face unreadable. Figured as much, don't get many visitors out here. This town's quiet, but it's got its share of problems. Still, it's better than what's out there. What do you mean, what's out there? Zelera asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. She couldn't help it. There was something about this man that intrigued her. He seemed to know more about the world than he was letting on. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the truck rumble over the bumpy road in silence for a few moments. Then, as if weighing the importance of what he was about to say, he spoke again. There's a lot of bad things in the world. Wars, betrayal, people willing to do anything to survive. But here, it's different. The people here mind their own business. Not much happens, but when it does, it's usually not good. Still, it's peaceful compared to the rest of the world. Zelera's stomach tightened at his words. She had heard enough about wars and betrayal to last a lifetime, but what he said made her think about the future, about her children. They couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, the past would catch up with them, and she couldn't protect them forever. The truck came to a slow stop in front of a small, single-story house. The front porch was cluttered with a few chairs, and there were faint lights glowing inside. A small barn stood nearby, its silhouette barely visible in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it looked welcoming enough. The man parked the truck and killed the engine, the sudden silence settling around them like a blanket. "We're here," he said, glancing over at Zelera. "This is where you'll stay for the night. You'll be safe here." Zelera nodded, relieved to finally be off the road. She turned to her children, helping them out of the truck. They were quiet, their faces drawn and tired from the journey. As they stepped onto the dirt ground, Zelera looked up at the rancher. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now, the weight of gratitude and exhaustion mixing in her tone. "I don't know what we would have done without you." The rancher gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "No problem, it's the least I can do." Zelera wanted to ask more questions, but something in his eyes told her that he wasn't one to share much. He had helped them, and that was enough, for now. She could ask more questions later when they were settled and safe. The house was small but clean. There was a fireplace in the living room and a table set for 4. The walls were bare, save for a few pictures of horses and cows, and there was a faint smell of wood and hay in the air. The rancher gestured for them to sit at the table. "Make yourselves comfortable," he said. "I'll get you something to eat. It's not much, but it'll keep you going for now." Zelera nodded, grateful for the simple hospitality. She sat down with her children, trying to create a sense of normalcy in the midst of everything that had happened. They were safe, at least for the moment. The rancher went to the small kitchen and returned with some bread, cheese, and a pot of stew. It wasn't anything special, but it smelled warm and comforting. Zelera accepted it gratefully, not wanting to refuse the only kindness they had received in days. As they ate, the rancher remained quiet, watching them carefully but never intruding. Zelera felt the weight of the silence between them, but she didn't mind. It was better than the chaos and the noise they had left behind. Her children ate slowly, too tired to say much, and the warmth of the food began to ease the tension in her shoulders. When they finished eating, the rancher showed them to a small bedroom. There were 2 beds, simple but clean, with blankets that smelled like fresh hay. Zelera tucked her children in, smoothing their hair as they drifted off to sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, watching them, her heart full of love and fear. The rancher came by to check on them before he left for the night. "You'll be safe here. I'll keep watch," he said, his voice low. "Thank you," Zelera replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." He gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just take care of yourself, that's all I ask." With that, he left, closing the door behind him. Zelera sat for a moment in the dim light, listening to the quiet breathing of her children. They were safe for now, but the uncertainty of the future loomed large. She had hoped for peace, but deep down, she knew the past wasn't done with her yet. It would catch up with them sooner or later. But for tonight, she allowed herself to rest, to savor the brief comfort they had found in this strange new world. The rancher had given them a place to stay, a place to hide. But as Zelera lay down beside her children, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The morning sun shone through the small window of the house, casting soft golden rays across the wooden floor. Zelera woke to the sound of birds chirping outside, a sound so different from the noise of war and chaos she had grown used to. For a brief moment, it felt like she was living in a dream, a peaceful life, far removed from the destruction and danger that had defined her existence for so long. But reality quickly set in. She was still a fugitive, still running from a past she could never escape. She sat up slowly, her muscles sore from the long journey. The room was quiet except for the gentle sound of her children's breathing. Lyra was curled up tightly, a small smile on her face as she dreamed. Zane, on the other hand, was already awake, his dark eyes wide open, scanning the room as if he were always on alert. "Morning, Mom," Zane whispered, his voice low and cautious. Zalara smiled at him, trying to reassure him, though she knew the fear never fully left his heart. "Morning, Zane, did you sleep okay?" He shrugged but didn't answer right away. "I don't know, it's just different here." Zalara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They had been in so many places, so many shelters, but nothing ever felt like home. The war had taken that from them. But this place, this small town, felt different. She couldn't quite explain why, but something about it made her feel like they might have a chance at a fresh start. "I know," she said softly. "It's different for all of us. But it's safe here for now. We just have to keep going." Zane didn't respond, but he seemed to relax a little as he climbed out of bed and began to get dressed. Zalara moved quietly to the window, her eyes scanning the view outside. The town was still quiet, still empty. The simple houses dotted the landscape, the rolling hills in the distance bathed in morning light. It seemed like a place where time moved slowly, where people could disappear and live unnoticed. But that peace was fragile, and she knew that as long as she and her children were here, they would never truly be safe. It was only a matter of time before someone came looking for them. She shook off the thought, trying to push it to the back of her mind. They had to make the most of the time they had here. They had to find a way to rebuild. As she turned from the window, she heard footsteps outside the door. Jake's boots thudded softly on the wooden floor as he approached. He knocked once before entering, his face expressionless but kind. "Morning," he said gruffly. "Breakfast is ready. I'll be out back if you want to talk later." Zalara nodded, a quiet thank you escaping her lips. He was always so straightforward, so matter-of-fact. She appreciated that about him. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry into her past. It was a relief, but also unsettling in its own way. She helped her children get ready, brushing the tangles from Lyra's hair and making sure Zane was dressed properly. They all followed Jake outside, where the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. Jake had set up a simple breakfast on the porch, with bread, eggs, and the kind of meal that felt familiar and comforting. Zalara couldn't remember the last time she had sat down to a meal like this. Just food, no politics, no scheming, no fear. They sat down together at the small table, and Jake passed around plates of food. The children ate quietly, their faces still tired from the events of the previous days. Zalara tried to focus on the moment, to enjoy the normalcy of it all, but her mind kept wandering back to what had brought her here. Her past, the things she had lost. Jake watched her for a moment, his brown eyes studying her closely. "You're thinking too much," he said suddenly, his voice soft but direct. "Whatever happened to you, you can't keep it all bottled up. You'll drive yourself crazy." Zalara looked up at him, surprised by the sharpness of his words. "I'm just trying to make sure my kids are safe, that's all." He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he glanced over at the kids, who were still busy eating. His gaze softened for a moment before he spoke again. "I get it, but you need to take care of yourself too. It's not just about survival. You're not going to be able to protect them if you don't take care of yourself." Zalara was silent for a long moment, letting his words sink in. It wasn't something she wanted to hear, but she knew he was right. She had been so focused on keeping her children safe, on running from one place to the next, that she hadn't stopped to think about her own well-being. "Thank you," she said quietly, finally meeting his eyes. "I don't know how you do it. You've been kind to us, more than I deserve." Jake shrugged, his expression unreadable. "No need to thank me, it's the right thing to do." There was an awkward pause, and Zalara realized she wasn't sure what to say next. She didn't know if she could ever repay him for what he had done for her and her children. She didn't know if she would ever feel safe again. But for now, she would hold on to this moment, this brief respite from the chaos. Maybe it was all they had. The silence between them stretched, comfortable but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Zalara felt herself growing restless. The peace was too quiet, too fragile. Her mind raced with all the things she couldn't control, the looming danger that seemed just around the corner. Suddenly, a loud knock at the door interrupted the silence. Zalara froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Her first instinct was to hide, to run. She turned to Jake, her face pale with panic. Jake stood up calmly, his hand brushing the dust from his jeans. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm. "I'll see who it is." Zalara's breath caught in her throat as she watched him walk toward the door. She didn't know if she could trust anyone outside this small house. What if it was someone from her past? What if the warlords had found them? Jake opened the door, and Zalara could just barely hear the voices outside. A man was speaking to him, but the words were muffled. Zalara couldn't make them out, but she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Seconds felt like hours, but soon Jake came back inside, his face unreadable. He didn't say a word, just motioned for Zalara and the kids to stay put. She didn't move, her mind racing with questions. Who was it? What did they want? After what felt like an eternity, Jake returned. He closed the door behind him gently and sat back down at the table, his expression still hard to read. Zalara's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for him to speak. "Just some locals," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing to worry about." Zalara didn't believe him. She could hear the edge in his voice, the slight tension in his shoulders. Something had happened, something he wasn't telling her, but she knew better than to press. For now, she would have to trust him, even if it felt like her whole world was unraveling. "We need to leave soon," she said quietly. "We can't stay here forever." Jake didn't argue, he just nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I understand, we'll figure it out, but for now, let's just take it one step at a time." Zalara wasn't sure if she believed him, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this nightmare. She looked at her children, who were now finished with their food and playing with the small toys they had brought with them. They were so young, so innocent. They deserved better than this life. And for the first time in months, Zalara felt like maybe she could give it to them. Zalara awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the soft breeze that flowed through the cracks in the wooden house. The morning sun had risen early, casting a warm, golden light over the room. It was another quiet day in this small, rural town, but the stillness around her did little to calm the storm inside her mind. The fear of being found, of running out of time, never left her. She lay in bed for a moment, watching her children sleep soundly beside her. Lyra was curled up tightly, her little face peaceful despite the hardships they had faced. Zane, ever the vigilant one, was already awake, staring out the window at the world beyond. He had inherited her sense of caution, and it worried Zalara more than she cared to admit. He was too young to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, but she could see the burden in his eyes every day. Zalara's thoughts drifted back to the conversation she had with Jake the night before. It had been the first real conversation they'd had since they arrived. The simple rancher had offered them a place to stay, without asking any questions, without prying into their past. She had wondered for a moment why he was being so kind, but then she realized it didn't matter. He was offering them something she hadn't had in a long time: safety. She pulled herself out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake her children just yet. They had been through so much, and she wanted them to rest for as long as possible. After slipping into a simple dress, she stepped out into the crisp morning air. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. Jake was already up, tending to the small garden at the edge of the yard. He didn't seem surprised to see her, just nodded a silent greeting before turning back to his work. Zalara stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. She had grown used to being in control, used to making decisions and leading those around her. But here in this small town, she felt lost. She didn't know what the next step was, where they would go, or how they would survive. "I didn't expect to find peace like this," Zalara said finally, her voice quiet but sincere. "After everything. I thought it would be impossible." Jake paused for a moment, then straightened up, brushing the dirt from his hands. "Peace is rare," he said simply, "but it's something worth fighting for." Zalara looked at him, trying to understand the depth of his words. He wasn't just talking about the peace of a quiet town. There was something more in his eyes, something that spoke of battles fought and lost, of sacrifices made for the sake of survival. She wanted to ask him more, but something held her back. Maybe it was the fear of what she might learn, or maybe it was the simple fact that she didn't yet trust him fully. She wasn't sure. "I need to get to town today," Zalara said after a moment. "I need supplies, and I need to know what's going on in the world beyond this place." Jake nodded. "I'll take you. I'll make sure you're safe, but stay alert, all right? Things might look peaceful here, but not everyone in this town is as welcoming as me." Zalara wasn't sure if that was a warning or just a statement of fact, but she appreciated the honesty. She had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. The world was full of people with hidden agendas, and it was up to her to protect her family from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The ride into town was quiet, with the two of them sitting in the front of the truck, the engine rumbling beneath them. The small dirt road stretched out before them, lined by fields and farmland. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago they had been running for their lives, constantly looking over their shoulders, afraid of every noise in the distance. Here in this small town, things felt normal. It was almost surreal. When they arrived in town, Zelera couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The streets were quiet, with a few people going about their business, tending to shops or chatting with neighbors. It wasn't like the crowded cities she had known, with their frantic energy and constant movement. This place was slow, peaceful, and it made her feel both safe and uneasy at the same time. Jake parked the truck in front of a small store, its windows lined with produce and other essentials. He turned off the engine and looked over at Zelera. "I'll be here waiting," he said. "Don't take too long." Zelera nodded and stepped out of the truck, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, where people lived so simply, so quietly. The contrast to her former life was stark. She had come from wealth, from power, from a place where everything was within reach. And now, she was just another stranger in a small town, hoping to survive. The bell above the door jingled as she entered the store. The shopkeeper, an older woman with gray hair and a kind face, looked up from behind the counter. She smiled warmly at Zelera. "Well, it's not often we get new faces around here," the woman said. "What can I do for you?" Zelera hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I need some supplies, food, water, anything you can spare." The shopkeeper nodded and began gathering items, placing them in a small basket. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked casually, her voice friendly but curious. Zelera gave her a tight smile. "No, just passing through." The woman didn't press her for more information, but Zelera could see the curiosity in her eyes. This town might be peaceful, but it was still a close-knit community. News traveled fast, and Zelera knew she had to be careful. One wrong word, one slip of the tongue, and the whole town could turn on her. After a few minutes, the shopkeeper handed Zelera the basket, and she paid with the small amount of credits she had left. The exchange was simple, but it felt like a small victory. She was surviving, at least for now. When she returned to the truck, Jake was leaning against the side, his arms crossed. His eyes were scanning the street, ever watchful. He didn't ask what she had gotten or why she was gone so long. It wasn't his business. Zelera appreciated that. "Ready to go?" Jake asked, starting the engine. Zelera nodded, sliding into the truck. As they drove back to the house, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. They had food, supplies, and for now they were safe. But in the back of her mind, she knew that safety was fleeting. No place was truly safe, not for someone like her. When they arrived back at the house, Zelera was exhausted. The simple act of going to town had drained her more than she expected. But there was still so much left to do. They couldn't stay in this small house forever. Sooner or later, someone would come looking for them, and when they did, Zelera would have to make a choice. She sat on the porch, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Her children were inside, playing quietly, and for a moment it felt like everything might turn out okay. But she knew better than to trust in appearances. The world was full of dangers, and the past was never far behind. Jake came out of the house, wiping his hands on his jeans. He sat next to her but said nothing. Zelera didn't need him to speak. She knew what he was thinking. They both understood that the peace they had found was temporary. They were survivors, both of them, and survivors always had to keep moving. "I'm going to fix the fence tomorrow," Jake said finally. "The wind's been tearing it up. We'll need to be ready in case anything changes." Zelera looked at him, his face serious but calm. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what we would do without you." Jake shrugged, looking out at the horizon. "You're welcome. Just don't forget, you're not alone here." Zelera didn't know if she could ever truly trust anyone again, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she could. And that was enough for now. The morning sun came up slowly over the hills, casting long shadows across the land. Zelera sat outside, watching the world wake up around her. The quiet of the morning was soothing, and for a moment she almost felt like everything would be okay. But she knew better. Peace was a fleeting thing, and she could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her, even in this peaceful town. She glanced over at the small house where her children were still asleep. Lyra had a soft, peaceful expression on her face, and Zane, as always, was alert, his eyes open but not yet fully awake. It was a bittersweet sight for Zelara. She had wanted to give them a life free from fear, but that seemed impossible now. The war that had torn apart her world was still very much alive in her memories, and she knew that it wouldn't be long before it caught up to her. "Mom!" Zane's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood at the door, his eyes scanning the yard. "Are we really safe here?" Zelara didn't answer right away. She didn't want to lie to him, but she didn't want to scare him either. "For now," she said finally, her voice soft. "We're safe, but we have to stay alert." Zane nodded, but Zelara could see the worry in his eyes. She hated seeing him like this, so grown up for his age, carrying the weight of the world on his small shoulders. He shouldn't have to worry about survival, but the world they lived in didn't give them any other choice. Jake came out from the barn, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. He looked up at Zelara as he approached, his expression unreadable. "We've got work to do today," he said simply. "The fence is falling apart and I'll need some help with it." "You think you and the kids can give me a hand?" Zelara looked at him, surprised by the request. She wasn't sure what kind of help he expected, but she nodded anyway. She was grateful for any distraction, anything to take her mind off the constant worry that gnawed at her. "We'll help," she said, standing up. "I can do something." Jake gave a small nod, as if he hadn't expected anything less from her. There was something about him that made her feel like he wasn't just helping out of kindness. He was helping because he understood, because he knew what it meant to survive. He wasn't asking for anything in return, but Zelara couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, testing her in some way. The three of them worked together in silence, repairing the fence around the property. The sun beat down on them, making the work feel harder than it should have been, but Zelara didn't complain. She kept her head down, focusing on the task at hand. Her children worked with surprising determination, too. Lyra, though small, was helping carry tools, while Zane took on the more difficult tasks, fixing the broken parts of the fence with quick, practiced movements. As the hours passed, Zelara found herself feeling more at ease. The work was simple, and the rhythm of it was calming. For a few hours, she didn't have to think about the past, about the enemies chasing her or the people she had lost. For a few hours, she could just focus on what was right in front of her, the fence, her children, the safety they had found here. After they finished the fence, Jake led them inside for a break. The house was quiet, the air cool from the shade of the porch. Zelara sank into a chair, grateful for the rest. Her body ached from the work, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that made her feel like she was contributing, like she was doing something to build a future. "We've got dinner ready," Jake said as he poured them all a glass of water. "It's not much, but it should be enough." Zelara took the glass from him, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. She looked up at him, surprised by the simplicity of the gesture. There was no expectation, no ulterior motive. He was just being kind, offering them something they hadn't had in so long, normalcy. They sat down to eat, and for a while the only sound was the clink of silverware against plates. Zelara tried to relax, but her mind kept wandering back to the reality of their situation. They couldn't stay here forever. The world was too big, too dangerous, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, her past would always be there, waiting for her. As they finished their meal, Jake stood up, stretching his arms above his head. "I'll be working out back tomorrow. You're welcome to help if you want, but I understand if you need some time to rest." Zelara nodded. "We'll be here. I don't want to waste this chance." Jake's gaze lingered on her for a moment, as if considering her words. Then he nodded and walked toward the back of the house, disappearing into the barn. Zelara watched him go, her thoughts tangled. She had come to trust him, but there were still so many things she didn't know. About him, about this town, about the life she was trying to build. "I don't like it," Zane's voice interrupted her thoughts. "It's too quiet here." Zelara turned to look at her son, her heart heavy. He had been so quiet lately, and his words made her wonder if he had sensed something she hadn't. "I know," she said softly. "I don't like it either, but we have to make the best of it." Zane didn't reply, but his eyes were troubled. Zelara couldn't blame him. This place, this life, felt like it could collapse at any moment. She was doing her best to hold everything together, but she knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. The next morning, Zelara woke early, unable to sleep any longer. She had spent the night tossing and turning, her mind racing with thoughts of the past, of what was to come. She couldn't keep running. Sooner or later, someone would find them, and she had to be ready. She got dressed quietly and slipped outside, needing a moment alone. The air was still cool from the night, and the sky was just beginning to turn pink with the first light of dawn. The land was peaceful, calm, but the quiet felt like a warning. Jake was already out back, working on something near the barn. Zalara walked toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. "You're up early," he said without looking up. "Everything okay?" Zalara paused, then nodded. "I just needed some air." He set down the tool he was holding and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You know you can't keep running forever." Zalara looked at him, her heart heavy. She had known this day would come, the day when she had to face the truth. "I know," she said softly, "but I don't know what else to do." Jake didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, his brown eyes steady. "You can stay here, you know, if you want, but you need to make a choice, Zalara. Running forever isn't an option." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Zalara felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to run anymore, but could she trust this man, this place? Could she let go of her fear, of her need to protect her children at all costs? "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice small. Jake nodded. "I understand. But you'll never know until you stop running." Zalara turned away, her heart aching. She had always been the one in control, always the one making the decisions. But now, in this quiet place, she didn't know what to do anymore. The fear, the uncertainty, they had become a part of her. She couldn't escape them, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she could try. Maybe it was time to stop running. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Zalara stood there, uncertain but hopeful. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that there might be a future for them here. A future where she didn't have to run anymore.